Purport. In this verse, the word tyakshan is very significant in relation to Lord Shri Krishna's leaving his body. Since he is the eternal form of existence, knowledge and bliss, his body and his self are identical. Therefore, how is it possible that he would leave his body and then disappear from the vision of the world? There is a great controversy amongst the non-devotees or Mayavadis about the mysterious disappearance of the Lord, and the doubts of those men with a poor fund of knowledge have been very elaborately cleared by Srila Jiva Goswami in his Krishna Sandarbha. According to Brahma Samhita, the Lord has many forms. It is stated therein that the Lord has innumerable forms, and when he appears within the vision of the living entities as Lord Krishna actually appeared, all such forms amalgamate with him. Besides all these infallible forms, he has his universal form, as manifested before Arjuna on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. Here in this verse, the word spitam is also used, which indicates that he left his gigantic universal form, called the Virat Rupa, not his primeval eternal form, because there is hardly any possibility of his changing his form of Satchit Ananda. The simple understanding is at once realized by the devotees of the Lord. But those who are non-devotees, who perform hardly any devotional service to the Lord, either do not understand this simple fact or purposely raise a controversy to defeat the eternity of the transcendental body of the Lord. This is due to the defect called the cheating propensity of the imperfect living entities. By practical experience also, it is seen, up to the present day, that the Lord's transcendental form is worshipped by devotees in different temples, and all the devotees of the Lord factually realize that the form of the deity in the temple is non-different from the form of the Lord. This inconceivable performance of the internal potency of the Lord is described in Bhagavad Gita 7.25. Naham prakasha sarvasya yogamaya samavritaha. The Lord reserves the right of not being exposed to everyone. In the Padma Puran, it said, Atat Shri Krishna namadi na bhavet grayam indriye. The name and form of the Lord cannot be perceived by the material senses, but when he appears within the vision of the mundane people, he assumes the form of the Virat Rupa. This is an additional material exhibition of form, and is supported by the logic of a subject and its adjectives. In grammar, when an adjective is taken away from the subject it modifies does not change. Similarly, when the Lord quits his Virat Rupa, his eternal form does not change. Although there is no material difference between himself and any one of his innumerable forms. In the 5th canto, it will be seen how the Lord is worshipped in different planets, in his different forms even now, and how he is worshipped in different temples of this earth also. Sri Jiva Goswami and Sri Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur have very elaborately explained this incident of the Lord's disappearance in their commentaries, quoting various authentic versions of Vedic literatures. We purposely do not include them all here to avoid an increase in the volume of this book. The entire matter is explained in Bhagavad Gita as quoted above. The Lord reserves the right of not being exposed to everyone. He always keeps himself out of the vision of the non-devotees, who are devoid of love and devotion, and thus he puts them still further away from the Lord. The Lord appeared on the invitation of Brahma, who prayed before the Kshirodakshaya Vishnu, and therefore when the Lord appeared, all the forms of Vishnu amalgamated with him, and when the mission was fulfilled, all of them disintegrated from him in the usual course. Let's recite the Mangalacharya. Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Utapadakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamascha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadhvetam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamascha He Krishna Kuruna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripasindhyubhya eva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Nityanamine. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Shripad ki jai. Thank you everyone for joining. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. And I pray that I can speak something which is meaningful, which helps all of us and purifies all of us. So this chapter 4 in Canto 3 we start off with a continuation of the conversation between Vidura and Uddhava. And in the first verse, actually, we find that the end of the Yadu dynasty is dawning on us. And in the next verses, we see how all of Krishna's family members become intoxicated on rice liquor and then start fighting and basically start destroying each other. And all of that is apparent, right? It's not that the Lord's pure devotees are actually fighting, are actually intoxicated by liquor, but it's all apparent. And recognizing that the end of the dynasty is upon him, Krishna also then decides, okay, now's my time to leave, now's my time to go to the banks of the Saraswati and focus on his last pastime. And at that point, Maitreya Muni also comes into the picture. And Maitreya Muni gets to witness an amazing conversation between Krishna and his devotee, Uddhava. And as the Lord wraps up his pastimes, then Uddhava is very depressed. He's very agitated in separation. But he was imparted with an instruction to go to Bhadraka ashram by the Lord himself. And so he's taken it upon himself that, okay, I'm in this separation, I'm in this mood of separation, but the Lord has given me something. He's told me to do something. So let me go. Let me go to Bhadraka ashram. And all of this Vidura is hearing. Vidura is hearing about the end of the dynasty. Vidura is hearing about this conversation between Uddhava and Krishna. And he himself is now feeling, okay, like, tell me more. Tell me what actually happened in the conversation between yourself and the Lord, to Uddhava. And so Uddhava then goes, actually, you should hear from Maitreya Muni. Because Uddhava is recognizing that there's a level of etiquette, there's a level of seniority that Maitreya Muni has and Vidura have compared to him. And so he's respecting the boundaries and he's saying that actually better than hearing from me is to hear from Maitreya Muni. And then hearing all of this, we then take a step even further back from the conversations and go to Parikshit Maharaj and Shukdev Goswami, where Parikshit Maharaj is now hearing all of these pastimes of the Lord with his devotees. And then he's just wondering, like, who is this Uddhava? And so he asks Shukdev Goswami, well, everybody, all the dynasties were demised. All the great commanders, all the great personalities have gone away now. They've left the planet. But why is Uddhava left? Why is it only Uddhava that's left? And so he's inquiring from Shukdev Goswami about this point. And then we come to today's verse, where Shukdev starts to speak. He's starting to reply to that question from Parikshit Maharaj. And he says, my dear king, the cursing of the Brahmanas was only a plea, but the actual fact was the supreme desire of the Lord. He wanted to disappear from the face of the earth after dispatching his excessively numerous family members. He thought to himself as follows, and in the later verses we'll see what the reply is. But we see that the pastime of the demise of the dynasties and the pastime of Krishna leaving, Krishna's disappearance, was all orchestrated, according to this verse, by the desire of the Lord. So the Lord desired, he wanted to end all these pastimes, which is why he created all these different functions to allow that to take place. But when we speak about somebody dying, somebody leaving in this world, we usually don't say that, oh, they're disappearing from the planet. But time and time again, we see in the Bhagavatam, in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, when we're talking about the Lord and his pure devotees, we talk about their disappearance. When we celebrate the appearance and or the birthdays and the death anniversaries in the Vaishnav calendar, we say the disappearance day of Haridas Thakur, the disappearance day of Srila Prabhupada. So what does this actually really mean? Right? It means that the Lord and his pure devotees are always present. They're always performing their pastimes, but sometimes they're within our vision, and sometimes they're not. Srila Prabhupada uses the example of the rising and the setting of the sun. Just as when we think of the sunrise, right? Today it's morning and somehow, the sun is quite shining today. And then I said that and then it will be really cloudy in a few minutes. But we see that when the sun is rising, we don't go, oh, it's a new sun, it's a brand new sun. Or when the sun is setting, we don't say that the sun is dying. No, because we know the next day the sun will rise again and it'll be the same sun. It's not a different sun each day. It's the same sun coming, rising and then setting. And in the same way, Prabhupada uses that example to explain that actually Krishna is just like the sun. He appears and he disappears, but his pastimes, his leelas are always going on in one world or another. And so, just as the sun is always present, just as the sun is always shining, but it's because of the orbit and the rotation of the earth that we don't always see the sun. In the same way, Krishna's pastimes, Krishna's presence is always there, but just because of our material vision, we're not able to see the Lord. And so, some people might take that disappearance of Krishna as Krishna is just like one of us. He's got this material body made of flesh, bones, blood, bile, mucus, air. And he's just like us, We die, he dies. For some reason, they just call it disappearance. But actually on top of that, people will then impose the restrictions, the limitations of what we experience in this body onto Krishna. That he also goes through these things. This stress from leaving Vrindavan, in his pastime, or his disappearance pastime, how he gets shot in the foot and then he's losing all this blood and now he's dying. People will argue these things. But in the Brahma Samhita, it said, Ishvara Parama Krishna Satchitananda Vigraha. It's described that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead who has a spiritual body which is Satchit Ananda, which is eternal, full of knowledge and full of bliss. By that, we see and understand that we have material bodies. Our spirit soul, our existence is separate from the material body. But the name, fame, qualities, pastimes of the Lord are non-different to him. Because being spiritual means that it's all one and the same. They're non-different. Krishna's name, Krishna's form, and Krishna himself are non-different from one another. And that's the inconceivable greatness and completeness of the Lord. That no matter what he does, he's always Om Purnam, he's always complete. His attributes are always complete also. And then in the purport, Srila Prabhupada talks about how some people misconstrue the activities and disappearance of the Lord as well. People that reject the idea of God, maybe they're atheistic, or maybe they're just so materialistic that they don't want to accept the supremacy of the Lord and the Bhagwan feature of the Lord. And to elaborate that, Srila Prabhupada actually talks about the example of a deity, right? The form of the Lord in the form of a deity. And we can understand that, okay, if a new person walks in, if the curtains were open or if the curtains just open and somebody's new to the temple, then they look at the deities and think, wow, this statue, this idol looks so beautiful. Look at the way that they've dressed it. Look at the way they've decorated this statue. And they're worshipping a statue. But then with time, if they're sincere, if they're serious, or if they're inquisitive, then they come to this point where they start learning the philosophy. They associate with devotees. They accept prasadam, they accept service, and they realize, actually, this isn't a statue. This isn't an idol. This is Radha Gokulananda, Sitaram Lakshmana Hanuman. This is Gauranatai. These are actually personalities. And at least where I'm at, that is still very theoretical. I go in front of the deities and I go, okay, the scriptures say you're the Supreme Personality of Godhead, so I accept you as such. But really, I'm still seeing just a statue. But then as we go deeper in our bhakti, as we go deeper in our own realizations, then we find that actually the deities are actually reciprocating. The deities are actually real. And that is not just a manifestation or not just a depiction of the Lord, but it actually is the Lord himself. And we see those who are very advanced, who are very deep in their relationship with Krishna. We actually see this mood in them, where they may come in front of the deities, they may come in front of the Srimad Bhagavatam, and their focus, their absorption is such that they're not going to these things because they have to, or because they're told that this is God. They're going to these because actually they have a deep sense of love, realization, and devotion that this actually is Krishna. But on the other hand, we see that those who can't recognize Krishna, those who are maybe atheistic, how does Krishna deal with them? And Sri Prabhupada talks about this verse. Naham prakasha sarvasya yogamaya samavritaha mudayam nabijanati lokamamajmavvyayam. Bhagavad Gita 7.25. Translation. I am never manifest to the foolish and unintelligent. For them I am covered by my internal potency, and therefore they do not know that I am unborn and infallible. So such people might come to the temple, they might see the deities, they might see the Bhagavatam, they might have an opportunity to hear and learn the philosophy, but they're so absorbed in denying the existence of God that they can't have the vision to see God. They're unable to see Krishna in the deity form. They can't see the beauty of Krishna, that can't see the spiritual reality that exists. So they will just consider, oh, these people, they're worshipping a statue, they're worshipping a man-made object. They're dressing the statue, the man-made object nicely. They're decorating it nicely. And they're worshipping the statue. Strange. But actually that's also the Lord's doing. Because the Lord himself desires and chooses who he wants to have vision of him. The Lord chooses who he wants to be able to connect with him. So actually all of us are fortunate in some way that the Lord has desired to open our hearts up to be able to see that, okay, to some degree, even if it's just scripturally, theoretically, that the Lord is here, the Lord is present. Because if we look at it, what's the difference between us as devotees coming in front of the Lord, seeing the Lord, and a non-devotee? What's actually the difference? We have the same set of eyes, the same set of ears, the same sense of smell through the nose, the same sense of tongue to speak or to taste food, the same skin to touch and feel things. What's actually different between us and the non-devotees? Why is it that when we come in front of the deities, when we come to the temple, we see, oh, Krishna is there, and they see, oh, it's just a statue? Atta Shri Krishna namadi na bhavet graimindriye sevam hi jivado swayam eva spuratyada. This is from the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, or summarized in the Nectar of Devotion. This idea, and I won't quote the translation, but this idea that actually the material senses, our eyes, our ears, our tongue, our nose, our skin, can't actually perceive the Lord. It can't actually perform any devotional service. But it's when we start purifying our senses, when we perform devotional service, when we use our tongue to chant the holy names, to taste prasadam, when we engage our senses in the service, then our senses become purified, and then we're actually able to come in contact with the reality of life. So it's by dint of our devotional activities that we're able to see the Lord's manifestation in life. Oftentimes we can go on the streets and get challenged by people who, aren't familiar or aren't interested. Shri Radha Goklananda, Shri Sitaram Lakshman Hanuman, Shri Gornitai Ki Jai. We can go on the streets and then people will challenge us. Oh, can you show me God? I can't see God. Have you seen God? Can you show me God? But actually, if you think about it, if you just sit for 5 minutes and think about it, it's actually a really, I don't know if I can say this, but I'm going to say it, really stupid question. Because if you want to see the stars, different universes, nebula in the sky, you need a telescope to see them. You need an instrument. If you want to see a microorganism, bacteria, you need a microscope to see them. If you want to see what's going on inside the body, you need an X-ray, a CT scan, MRI scan, some instrument to see them. So if you want to see divinity, what makes you think that you can see divinity with your material eyes? You need the instrument of divinity to see divinity. But when it comes to God, these people just go like, show me God. Show me with these eyes. But our process is that you see God through devotional service. We know Bhakti, I think it's Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, who would say, don't try to see God, but serve God. This idea that we'll see God through our service. When God is pleased with us, when God desires, then we will see God. But we have to attract God's desire. We have to attract Krishna's desire to see us. And the way to do that is through service. And that's the process of bhakti, right? Sarvapadi vinmuktam tatparitvena nirmalam rishikena rishikesha sevanam bhakti ruchyate. This idea that we engage our senses in the service of the Lord, and that's the process of bhakti. Because what happens? Two things happens when we do that. One is that our senses become purified. And the second is that we become free from our material, mundane vision of life. And both go hand in hand to help us come in contact and have the vision of God. So it's actually the service to the Lord that attracts the Lord. And even in Nectar of Devotion, a passage that always sticks out to me is, I think it's in the first chapter, this Attracting the Lord, I think it's entitled, where the first paragraphs are pretty much about this idea of devotional service. Everybody is attracted to Krishna, but Krishna is attracted to devotional service. And when we look at our life, when we look at the vision that we have, we see that actually developing this divine vision is the growth of a devotee. When we look at the advanced devotees, it's not that they've been in the movement for 20, 30 years and that's what makes them advanced. It's that they've had the experience, they've had realization of seeing God or God's hand in everything that's going on in life. And that's what makes them advanced, because they're at every step, they're able to see the Lord's plan manifest. And this idea of progressing our vision is actually very much consistent throughout the scriptures. When you just look at the Bhagavad Gita, okay, it's a story of Arjuna in a dilemma, and then Krishna is helping him. But you can see that it's actually just a demonstration of progressive vision. Because when you look at it, what's the situation? Arjuna starts off seeing the people on the battlefield. Vision with the eyes, the material vision with the eyes. But then he comes to the middle, and then he goes, oh, but that's my friends, my families, my well-wishers. And now he's looking at the battlefield with emotional vision. And then Krishna goes, okay, but you're not this body, you're a spirit soul. The scriptures say this, the scriptures say that. And he's imparting on to Arjuna scriptural vision, this theoretical knowledge of life, of the absolute life. And then Krishna takes it, or kicks it up a notch, as we'd say, and starts to give Arjuna spiritual vision. This idea that everything you're doing, connect it to Krishna, connect it to me, connect it to God, and then it will be perfect. And we see that as devotees, that's the trajectory we want to take. If we want to attract the Lord's mercy, if we want to attract the desire of the Lord to manifest in our life, we, like Arjuna, need to go on that journey to go, okay, right now I'm going through this anxiety, this difficulty, that difficulty. Because we're looking at the life through the emotional lens. But then we turn to the scriptures, we turn to the devotees, Guru Sadhu Shastra. We turn to the Guru and go like, okay, this is the situation. Help me find spiritual solutions to material problems. But then as we grow even more in our spiritual life, we then approach the devotees not for spiritual solutions to material problems, but to understand Krishna as he is. We want to develop our love for Krishna and associate with Krishna, not because Krishna consciousness can help us in our material life, but because we understand that Krishna consciousness is the real life. Janma karma chame divyam evam yo veti tatvatha tyakta deham punarjanma neti mameti Arjuna. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says that he who understands the transcendental nature of my appearance, of my activities, which includes disappearance, then such a person doesn't come back to the material world. He goes back to his Krishna's abode. And that's the trajectory we want to take. So if we want to focus on just living our material life and just having Krishna consciousness support our material life, that's there. You can do that. You can have the scriptural vision. You can be content with having scriptural vision of life. Turning to the Bhagavad Gita, to the Bhagavatam, whenever we have distresses, miseries in life. Or we can develop the divine vision, the vision of love for divinity, go deeper in the ocean of bhakti, and actually find that Krishna consciousness is the only life that makes sense. And it's the only life that will actually give us that pure transcendental bliss. So let's end there. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Prabhupada ki jai. Any comments, questions, corrections? Panchatattva Prabhu?
Hare Krishna, thank you very much, Prabhu. I just have a question regarding the spiritual body. I've heard it asked a couple of times, but never quite had a clear answer. This idea we're purifying our senses. Right now we cannot see Krishna with mundane senses, so we can purify our senses by service, and then we can perceive and serve Krishna. So is that implying that our spiritual body, of course, has spiritual senses? So is this spiritual body, is it already existing? Then this idea, Krishna, of course, is non-separate from his body, but are we non-different from our spiritual body? Is it all Satchidananda, or are we still the soul? And the soul's 1/10,000th of a human hair. So where does that come into? I get a little bit confused if you have any insights.
Yeah, so I can share my understanding, but I don't have reference. So I don't know if any of the senior devotees want to comment first before I do. Okay, so my understanding is that actually we also, this idea of a spiritual body, Satchidananda, is also within us. But remember, there's Krishna, which is full on quality, full on quantity, but then there's us who have the same quality, but a minute quantity. But this idea of conditioning, we can see it as layers that have covered the spiritual body from us, or over us. And so through the process of bhakti, what we're trying to do is remove those layers of dirt, so that we can come in contact with our original essence, which is the soul, which is the spiritual body. Because the soul and the spiritual body are identical. That's my understanding. I don't know if anyone would like to correct that. No? Is that good?
I'm actually not. I was going to say something on a slightly different angle. Prabhupada once said, first attain Swarup, then talk about Swarup. Sometimes you just, you can't actually go there until you're there. So that's just one angle. But it's still a good question.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, thank you for the class. I'm just trying to practically understand what happens when the Lord disappears. Reading from the purport, I'm not quite clear. So, Prabhupada uses this, he's kind of speaking about this word, spitam. So, he's saying that, he's kind of giving an analogy of the universal form. So, all these different forms of the Lord come into the Lord, right? Or Lord acquires the universal form, and then the Lord gives up all of these forms, or just as he gives up the universal form. So then, and we're very, very clear that there is no difference between the Lord and his form, right? And then secondly, what's the difference between us giving up our form and the Lord giving up his form? Does he give up his form?
Interesting question. Do you have
Because
any?
Prabhupada does speak about it in the purport, but it's just not quite clear what Prabhupada is saying. And then the amazing thing is Prabhupada says only the devotees will understand this. Right? Others won't be able to understand this.
So, in terms of the first part of the question, I don't know. I'd be looking to yourself, Paramakrishna Prabhu, to answer that. But in terms of the second part, so I go back to the analogy of the sunrise and sunset. This idea that actually it's only in our purview, it's only in our vision that the Lord, quote unquote, disappears. Because the Lord is always present. As you mentioned, the Virat Rupa is his form. But he can choose to manifest himself or his presence in the lives of those around him. And we see that actually even in the pastimes of when Krishna leaves Vrindavan, there are arguments where acharyas are saying that he didn't leave. But then we see in the Bhagavatam that he did leave. And so how do we reconcile the two? Well, both can still be simultaneously true. Because on the one side, according to the pastimes, he's left because he now needs to go and perform pastimes outside of Vrindavan. But then when you look at the life of the Vrajvasis, they revolved around Krishna so much that Krishna is still present. Because their life still revolved around Krishna just as it did before. So I guess going to the depths of the question, unfortunately I'm not qualified to be able to answer that, but hopefully that helps with some understanding. Any comments as opposed to questions? Prabhu.
It's a comment by Srila Prabhupada. Sorry. Oh, okay. The Supreme Personality of Godhead. It's an explanation in chapter 3, text, the purport of 3.3. Sorry. It's chapter 3, text 37, purport. It says here, the Supreme Personality of Godhead expanded himself into many of his increasing spiritual bliss, and the living entities are part and parcels of this spiritual bliss. But by misuse of our independence, when the service attitude is transformed into the propensity of sense enjoyment, they come under the sway of lust. But this material creation is created by the Lord to give the facility to the conditioned souls to fulfill these lustful propensities, and when they're completely purified by prolonged lustful activities, the living entities begin to desire or inquire about what is their real position. The inquiry in the beginning of this Vedanta is in the Vedanta Sutra, and the Brahma, as one should inquire for the Supreme. And the Supreme is defined in Srimad Bhagavatam as Jammadasya Navyo Niviyat. The origin of everything is the Supreme Brahman. Therefore, the origin of lust is also in the Supreme. If therefore this lust is transformed into love for the Supreme, is transformed into Krishna, or in other words, desiring everything for Krishna, then both lust and wrath can be spiritualized. Hanuman had said, Hanuman had said, the great servitor of Lord Ram exhibited wrath and burning golden Ravan, the golden city of Ravan. But by becoming so, by doing so, he became the greatest devotee of the Lord. So he says, here is also in the Bhagavad Gita, the Lord engages his wrath. In the wrath upon his enemies for the satisfaction of the Lord. Therefore, lust and wrath, when they are enjoyed in the Krishna consciousness, both become our friends or of our enemies instead of our enemies. So it's interesting. So this origin of everything can be used in service and can be transformed into the wonderful for Krishna to realize his bliss. Because his bliss, he wanted to be many. He wanted to be many. He didn't want to be alone. Krishna's happy. He wants somebody to share these things with. And so the devotees are brought in expansions to realize that actually Krishna has brought us to not only see him, but to realize that we're actually parts of his spiritual bliss. And how we use it is up to us. For his sake.
Thank you.
It's,
Thank you. Just one, because I know Mataji had a hand up. Okay, last one and then.
Hare Krishna, thank
Hare
you for
Krishna.
the class. What is the difference between material emotion and spiritual emotion?
So at a very high sort of level, externally the emotions may look the same, but, and actually I believe it's Nectar of Devotion that the different emotions are described, but we see that material emotions for us, so we might come in front of the Lord and cry, but then we'll also have the same crying for somebody else that we go to in the material world. Say we were leaving the manor for 3-4 months, but if we left somebody for 3-4 months, we'd also have the same sort of emotion and cry. But when you look at the pure devotees, when you look at the devotees who actually have the purity in their emotions for Krishna, then you see that their emotions are purely about Krishna. They're crying because they're bereft of Krishna. They're laughing because they're remembering Krishna or something related to Krishna, or they're with Krishna. But for material, I guess going back to what Brojan Prabhu was saying, a lot of it was also driven by the lust, by the desires of this world. So I guess in one way you can see that the material emotions are related to this world, and the spiritual emotions are always related to Krishna and Krishna's pure devotees. Okay.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna. Time we can speak. Sorry? Oh, okay, short question. Comment, I hope.
True, thank you. This is from Sri Prabhupada lecture about spirit soul. He says, there is spiritual atom. We are a spiritual atom. The atom is described in the Vedic literature, the form of the spirit, which we are actually.
Okay. So that goes to the form of the spirit. Jay, thank you for attending. Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Jai Shri Prabhupada ki, Jai.